Now it's time to talk about lighting, and you can go crazy with lighting. You can spend almost any amount of money on lighting, but luckily you don't have to. I'm gonna start over here on the right and we will move this way slowly. And if you're looking at this first light, you're probably thinking, Lee, that says Pro Photo on it. That can't possibly be affordable. And you're right, it's not. But the point that I want to make with this light is that if you're coming from still photography, there's a good chance you already own some sort of studio strobe that has a modeling light. 8 years ago when Patrick and I started F-Stoppers, we were both professional still photographers and I had a ton of Dynalite studio lighting gear. For the first year or two, 100% of our videos were all filmed with the Dynalite modeling lights. So even though those lights are pretty expensive lights, the fact that I already own them and I was using a feature that I really didn't ever use before, the modeling lights rather than the strobes, to me made them free. And of course, all of the modifiers that I was already accustomed to worked perfectly. So if I wanted to use reflector dishes or grids or beauty dishes or soft boxes like I'm being lit with right now, all of that stuff still worked for me and was very familiar to me as a still photographer, and it made the move to video that much easier. If you don't already own some sort of studio strobes, don't worry at all. You can go to Lowe's or Home Depot and you can buy any sort of work lamp. Honestly, these lights are going to be fine, and they're like 20 bucks, 40 bucks, something like that. Anything that's going to produce a constant light that doesn't flicker is going to be enough for you. And then when it comes to modifying that light, you can use a bed sheet, you could bounce it off a piece of foam core, or you could buy an umbrella or some sort of cheap softbox to soften the light even more easily. So if you're just getting into videography, do not go out and buy a Pro Photo strobe. That's definitely not a good use of money if you're just shooting video. But if you already own one of these, it's going to do a great job to shoot video, especially at the beginning. The only downside to lights like these is that in many cases, they're not very bright. They may have some loud fan noise that you have to deal with. And this one specifically is actually a B1. It has LED lights that do flicker when it comes to video. We've got D1s as well that we do use for shooting video sometimes. And occasionally we will use a B1, but we try not to just because we have to deal with that flicker. Now let's talk about this little LED panel here. I think we got this off eBay or Amazon like 6 or 7 years ago. This goes with us everywhere we go if we're traveling. This little guy takes 6 AA batteries. It's incredibly bright, and I love it because it fits in my backpack and it fits in my pocket. When we're traveling the world with Elia Liccardi filming the Photographing the World series, this is the only light that we bring. We just bring 2 of these things. This one specifically has little magnets around the side, and you can snap on gels to change the color of this light as well, and it can dim. Being able to dim your video lights is incredibly important, and you would be surprised there are a lot of video lights out there that cannot dim, so I would highly suggest buying one that can. Now, moving over to this little guy here, this is the Felix P360EX. We love this little light for one main reason. And as you can see, I can pull off this Pro Photo reflector dish here, and it fits perfectly on this Felix light. Now, again, if you don't already own Pro Photo, I would not suggest you buy Pro Photo for shooting video, and you may not even want to buy this Felix light. But this is such a huge feature for us because we already own tons of really expensive modifiers. So if we want to throw a reflector dish like this on here to focus the light forward, or we want to throw a grid or maybe a beauty dish, we already own all of it. So buying a light like this is a huge help if we want to shoot video, but we want to craft the light very specifically. So this light can also dim, which is great. I'm going to turn it down a lot right here. And the other incredible feature of this light is that it's bi-color. So it's got another knob that can actually change the color of the light as well. This is so helpful when you're wanting to either match the color temperature of other ambient lights. For instance, if you wanted to match like a light bulb, you could make it red or yellow like this. Or if you were going outside and you wanted that cool white light, you can use the exact same light. With some other lights that we use, we actually have to use gels and put it over the light. It's one more step and it's one more thing that you have to remember. So I really appreciate lights like this that have it built in. Now for our medium-sized video shoots that we have to travel for, these are the lights that we're going to use. They pack down so small, they can fit into almost any bag. They can really fit into a backpack if you need to. And so these are the things that we reach for first. The one downside to these lights is that they're just not that bright. That's the problem with small LED lights. Most LEDs need a lot of ventilation, and that ventilation takes up space. So even if lights aren't very heavy, in many cases they get larger and larger and larger the brighter they get. So let's talk about something the next size up over here. Over here on my left, this is the Peter Hurley Flex Kit by Westcott. And what's interesting about these lights is that the LEDs themselves are embedded onto a flexible panel. Let me grab one so you can see. So here's one of the larger panels that we own here. As you can see on the front, we've got Velcro. You can see the LEDs in the back here. This is a metal frame with Velcro on it, and the way this sticks on is just with Velcro on the back. So this entire panel actually flexes, hence the Flex Kit. And you can do a lot with this sort of thing. So if you just want to use it on the panel, kind of like a strip box, you can definitely do that. That's the way Peter Hurley uses it to shoot all of his headshots. But we love these for a number of different reasons. The first reason why we love these lights so much is because they are so bright. In fact, these are the brightest lights that we have ever used when it comes to video. So if you want the most versatility with your lights, definitely consider something like this. What we also love is that in some cases, we actually want to soften this light even more. We can take these off the frame and stick them in other sorts of light modifiers. For instance, what's lighting me right now is one of these units taken off and stuffed into a 3-foot octabox that's being held up above me here. And what we can do with this is get much softer light than we could get on this frame by itself. Now, you may have also noticed that there's a nice little kicker or highlight on this side of me, and it's a different color. What we have above my shoulder up here is another flex light just like this one of the small ones, and we've gelled it with an orange gel to give it this nice color. Now, the main two benefits of these lights, as I've already said, are that they are extremely bright and they are super versatile, the fact that you can actually pull them apart and flex them. The downside of these lights are that the ballasts used to actually power them are relatively large, and these do not color shift. However, I do have good news. Westcott does make color shifting panels just like this, and so if you've got the money to spend on them, I cannot recommend them highly enough. These are fantastic for video. Now, having those big light panels is great for a lot of light and spreading light all over the place and creating soft light, but if you need hard light, like this little light burst that we've created on the background here, you're gonna need a smaller light like this. And again, the reason why we love these little Felix lights is because they accept the ProPhoto accessories. So this is a ProPhoto grid that's used for the ProPhoto B1 or D1. And we love this thing because it just slides right on, and then we can create that super sharp beam of light. If you're the type of videographer that's gonna be working in town or working in a studio, having light panels like this is awesome. It's so great to have this much power on hand. However, if you're going to be traveling a lot, consider something like the Felix because it's just that much easier to travel with if having a ton of light isn't super important to you. I've definitely been in a lot of locations before where I'm trying to get an even exposure with my subject and then maybe the outside of a window, and you just can't do it with the Felix. And so having something like this is definitely worth it. So guys, that wraps up this quick section on lighting. This is the gear that we use in the studio and on location. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be very expensive. Before we wrap this up though, I want to show you one little issue that you may run into with some lights and some shutter speeds. So right now I'm being lit with the ProPhoto B1. You may be able to hear a little bit of a fan, and that's a problem in itself. But there's another problem with this light. Because it's battery powered, the modeling light is actually an LED light. And they did not design this strobe with videographers in mind. Let me show you what's going on here. If I lower the power, right now it's at full power, I'm gonna lower it by 1 stop. You can see that the light will start to flicker. In the video, I can't actually see it flickering with my own eyes, but you guys through the video camera can actually see it flickering. David, I want you to see if you can change the shutter speed and get the flicker to stop. All right, so David just went from a 30th to a 50th of a second, and he was able to mitigate most of that flickering. Let's go down another stop and see what happens. So David has changed the exposure to match the output of the light, but he's left it at 1/50th of a second. And as you can see, we're not really getting any flickering here either. The basic premise that I want you to take away from this lesson is that some lights that weren't made with videographers in mind may have an issue with flickering at different outputs. So some lights at full power may not flicker at all, and the second you start to dial them down a little bit, they may start to flicker. Some lights, it may be the opposite. Sometimes at full power, they might flicker, but when you actually use them at a lower power, they may not flicker at all. We've run into this issue with some cheaper lights and lights like these that were made with still photographers in mind and not videographers. But there's one other issue you may run into, and that's shooting with ambient lights in a room that you don't have control over. For instance, fluorescent lights. Let me turn the lights on above my head. So we've cut off the Pro Photo and turned on these ugly fluorescent lights above. And you'll notice there's a little bit of a flicker, but there's also this black band that's moving up the entire frame. This is actually the frequency of these lights pulsating. We can't see it with the human eye because it's too quick, but when we're shooting with a fast shutter speed, the camera can definitely pick it up. Now David's still shooting at a 50th of a second. So David, go ahead and try to change the shutter speed. We're just gonna arbitrarily try and change it and see if we can match the hertz of these lights to the frame rate or the shutter speed of our camera. So we've tried a few different shutter speeds. David has significantly improved this scene by just going up to 1/60th of a second. It's gotten a little bit closer to the refresh rate of these lights, but it still may not be perfect. And what I want to point out is that in some situations like this room, we don't have control over the output of these lights. We can't dim the lights. So we can either turn them on or off. And in some cases, you're not going to be able to get that flicker out of your footage. And so you're going to have to be prepared with lights of your own. Every time we shoot in this room, we cut all of the lights off overhead and we bring in our own lights just for this very reason. Now, some cameras like our GH5 actually give us the option to fine tune our shutter speed to match it with our lights perfectly. But this is very rare. Most DSLRs do not give that option. And even though the GH5 does have that option, we almost never rely on it. So keep in mind that not only is it important to understand how the lights around you are working, but it may also be important for you to have lights of your own to cover your ass in case you're in a situation like this. While we're talking about lights, let's talk about color and white balance. Right here, I'm being lit by two different lights with two totally different color temperatures. I'm gonna cut this light over here off and we'll first talk about this light on my right. This is a Pro Photo D1. We were just looking at a B1 in the other room, which was battery powered. This one is AC powered and it has a standard incandescent light bulb, which is a much yellower color. You'll notice on the B camera over here that we have a correct white balance, but for our A camera, this probably looks too yellow. So these two lights output the two most common colors that you're gonna be dealing with when it comes to photography or videography. An incandescent light bulb is around 3000 Kelvin and daylight is around 5500 Kelvin. Now, to get a correct white balance, what we have to do is match the Kelvin temperature to the light. So let's go ahead and set our A camera here to around 3000 Kelvin. So we found that this light looks best at around 2800 Kelvin, and as you can see, we have a relatively correct white balance on my face. And now if we want to cut this light off and turn the Felix light back on, we need to move the white balance back to 5500 Kelvin to get a correct color temperature. Now, we use lights all the time that are within a range of different color temperatures. It's not just one or the other here. And when we go outside, we're gonna have a huge range in color temperature as well. But so far, we've only been changing the color temperature and we haven't even considered the tint. And that's very important when it comes to video. So let's go outside and let me teach you about how tint can affect your white balance as well. Now, when we talk about changing color temperature, we are specifically talking about changing colors from blue to amber and back. There's also another huge component to this, and that is green to magenta. This is called the tint. Now, if you're a still photographer and you're accustomed to shooting in RAW, this really doesn't matter that much to you because you can easily change the color temperature and the tint once you get back into Photoshop or in Lightroom. But if you're gonna be shooting compressed video like we are in this tutorial, getting the correct white balance is extremely important, so you don't wanna overlook tint. Currently, I'm standing under a white gazebo being lit by sunlight that's bouncing around the blue sky and bouncing around the floor and the ceiling and these pillars in here. Basically, we're getting pretty even light, which doesn't require a significant tint shift. However, if we move out into the trees, we might start to see a green tint shift caused by reflection off of the grass and the leaves of the trees. So let's move into another area where changing your tint's going to come into play. So I've moved into an area of shade, and as you can tell, the white balance does not look correct here. We're stuck at 5,000 Kelvin. This is exactly what we started with in the gazebo. And David, why don't you raise the Kelvin and see if we can get a correct white balance with that alone? So we've warmed up the footage a little bit, but as you'll notice, this still doesn't look right. We have this weird green tint over the entire footage. You can really see this on my left cheek over here. And that's because instead of being lit by the sun itself, or maybe the blue sky that the sun is illuminating, instead the sun is lighting up the green grass and all of these green leaves, and that is reflecting onto my face. So what we can try to do now is go into the tint shift and shift this video from green to magenta a little bit, and hopefully we can even things out. So David has gone in and added 5 steps of magenta to this video, and it looks significantly better. But you will notice that there's still not a perfectly even color temperature from the left side of my face to the right side of my face, and that's just because I'm being lit very unevenly being outdoors. Once you get back into the studio, you'll have more control over that. Now we're filming this on the Panasonic GH5, and it gives us more color options when it comes to tint than other cameras that we've used in the past. As you can see, we can go up and down and change the green to magenta tint, and we can go from right to left and change the blue to amber color temperature as well. This really makes fine-tuning everything much easier because all of your settings are on one screen. Take a look at the settings in the Nikon D850. We have to change the color balance separately with the Kelvin temperature, and then we can change the magenta green shift separately in another menu. This is much more common when it comes to DSLR videos, so you may be used to something like this. And keep in mind that not all video cameras give you the option to change tint at all. If you find yourself in a situation where you do see a significant shift, you may want to try auto white balance. In some cases, that may be your best option. Now, you're not just going to run into this problem when you're out under green trees. We run into this problem all the time when it comes to tint. Many different professional lights that are actually sold for videographers come with some sort of tint in place. And you'll find that some LED lights have a tendency to have a little bit more magenta tint and others have a bit more green tint. You'll also find that if you have perfectly balanced lights, but you set them up in a very specific area, maybe that light's going to bounce off a painted wall, you're going to pick up some tints that way as well. Basically, you just need to keep this in mind, and when you're setting your white balance, don't just set the color temperature, also go in and set the tint if it's needed. Later in this tutorial, we're going to teach you how to color grade your footage, but you're gonna have the most options if you get things as close to perfect as you can in camera.